Hi guys, this is Stonebank and welcome to episode 2 of Studio Sessions, and today we're going to run through this. Right, so we'll run through this, but what I mainly want to focus on is the bass and what it consists of. The process that I use to make bass, which would be like synthesized in Serum, or, you know, when you could take this stuff and use it in any other synth that you like. So, right, the bass on its own sounds like this. And consists of E, G, B, and A. Groundbreaking stuff. So the patch as a whole is this. We have a sub, we have two oscillators, one with a wavetable, one with a saw with the first harmonic removed, a filter, put a peak sort of push in, and that'll be automated. Then we have noise, and then a main LFO that's routed to like 8 things, I believe. Yeah, 8 things. And this special part here, which is note. And I'll explain note in greater detail, as it's very important how having boosting frequencies that don't follow those key changes will have a dramatic effect on the shape and tone of the sound when it's created by distortion. Hopefully that'll make sense a bit further in the video. Otherwise I haven't done my job properly, have I? So, effects tab. We have just EQ and distortion. This sound is very dependent on the distortion and EQ going into it. So if I take these off and you listen to the sound on its own, that ain't what we're looking for. Turn on distortion. Better, put the EQ. And we have that sort of movement, and it sort of makes things feel a bit more pacey, especially on this sort of offbeat type of bass for hardcore that I would normally do. Before that, let's go into this section here where I set something up to explain what that whole note feature will do for us and how important it will be. First of all, what I want you to look at is, look at the harmonics. So when it's on E, it will shift up now to A. So the harmonics are there, they're set. And then when they change key, if it goes higher, obviously they go up. If it goes lower, they're going to go lower. As we distort the first harmonic, we're changing the sound. Then we'll boost some sort of the mid-range, going to sound like this. But watch what happens when the harmonics shift up, but we haven't followed the key with the EQ boost before the distortion. We get a drastically different result. And when we're using this process with EQ before distortion and trying to change and use things as a melody, so we do this inside of a synth, we need all these EQ points and free filters and things like that to follow the key. Otherwise, we're going to get different sounds per note, which isn't what we want. So now with that cleared up, we come back to our bass here. So as we can hear, when the key changes, every note has the same qualities. It doesn't feel brighter on some notes and then more distorted on other notes, depending where the harmonics are being shifted. So this is all down to this section here on Serum. Very important, the note section. And most people overlook this. In order to make our sound, we have all these sort of oscillators and the sub-oscillator and the noise and the filters and all that. That's going into, obviously, the effects. And then we're pushing an EQ and all the other stuff beforehand into this distortion. So firstly, we'll cover the distortion. This distortion, we're using the X shaper. And you've probably turned on the X shaper before and gone, when I move the drive, there's no sound coming out. And that's because it works differently to all the other modes. So other than the tube, soft clip, hard clip, diodes, etc., this X shaper is basically essentially 2 wave shapers. So there's A and B. So when the drive's on 0%, it's using shape A, so wave shaper A. And when it's on 100%, yep, it's using wave shaper B. So what we've got here is this wave shaper A, which obviously if you use a wave shaper before, this shape here is doing nothing to the sound, which is what we want. And then in B, it's a very hard clipped shape here. We're kind of using this like a wet dry, if you like. And I've used LFO1, dragged it onto here. As this comes up, then we're getting more distortion, and it comes back down, and then we're getting no distortion. So that's distortion covered. And how that's shaping up is we have this EQ boosting into the distortion, just like we did in that previous example with the Pro Q, and then we noticed how the notes changed and they went different when the harmonics moved up, but the EQ stayed static. So what we do here is we drag this note onto the frequency, and what this will do will then follow the frequency, obviously, that we set. So how you would apply this key follow, note follow, whatever you want to call it, onto something, simply drag it on like any other automation. And then what it's going to do is probably come out as unipolar, meaning from this point, it goes one direction and we want it to be bipolar. So we'll hold Shift and Alt, click the automation, and you'll notice here where we've set it, automation goes on both sides of the dial. The only other thing you need to remember is you want the amount to be 100, and that way it'll correlate correctly with the frequency and the mapping. So when you play something here, the notes follow it. So how I'm working is the distortion is at the end of the chain. I'm manipulating things before it to make the distortion react differently to the tone that I want. And the beauty of this is, where I've got a hard clipped wave shape here, is no matter what I do beforehand, I can boost the sub 15 dB. I can put notches up 30 dB. We're not going to peak in stupid amounts of volume because it's all being held down and clipped. What it will do though is change the tone. So the more we abuse that and sort of cut things, boost things, we're going to get different results. But obviously mentioning before, like I keep going on about, the note feature will then mean that every single boost we do, if it's with an EQ or filter, as long as it's following the key, we're going to get the same result when we use it as a melodic bass, which is super important. So let's get to the fun stuff, the oscillator tab. Right, let's mute oscillator A and B, the filter and the noise. The LFO 1, I've purposely linked this to everything that is automated and just use one LFO. I wouldn't always do this, but for demonstration purposes, it's a good way to show like the power of what you can do with just one shape. So this is a typical shape I would use for a bass line. Imagine this to be obviously 1/4, which obviously it says there. This is where your kick's sort of going to sit, and this is where your bass is going to come up. So LFO 1 is modulating 8 things, doing the volume of oscillator A, the volume of oscillator B, the cutoff frequency, noise volume, the sub volume, drive amount, and the gain boost on one of the EQs. Oh yeah, and the bend plus on the wavetable modulator here. So, firstly, a sub. Introducing the first harmonic that we need, which obviously the point of having the bass is to have the low end. If I bring my handy dandy analyzer over. So what we're trying to do is fill up this frequency range, more so with the lows and then the low mids. So without the distortion, we have one harmonic basically. We add some distortion. Sounds ugly, but we've created some more harmonics. So we have distortion and a sub. Now we can add a wavetable. So I've used Monster 4, which is part of the factory wavetables, and LFO 1 doing the volume and doing the bend plus. So now we have this. So we've added some more harmonics, added a bit of character, and a bit of tone. Next up, we've added oscillator B. So this was just a saw wave, taking off the first harmonic. So it would normally be like that. Boom. And this has 2 voices. So we're adding a subtle amount of stereo width to it. I wouldn't normally encourage you to go very wide with your basses in hardcore. In this case, it worked and no one's going to stop me. So LFO 1, doing the volume of that. Sounds all right without the distortion. Feels a bit flat. More raw, a bit distorted, a bit more sort of sharper, if you like. So a bit more sharper, yeah. Next up, we add a filter. So we'll just use the Peak 24 filter. We've got this automation here where the cutoff's going to move over a little bit and it's going to create a sort of wompy sort of sound. So it gives the bass more pace. That rhymed. On this filter, we've added a bit of drive and the resonance obviously to get the peak up to the top. And we notice here we've got this turned on, which is your filter key track, which is basically essentially a built-in version of this note thing that I harped on about earlier. So that's going to follow the keys. So we play a low note, play a high note, it fits accordingly. Next up, some noise. So I've added some bright noise, and with LFO 1, that's just moving the volume up a little bit. So obviously at the start of the note, no noise. It's going to blend in the noise, and adding the noise, blended in with everything else, then going into a heavy amount of distortion would create that sort of crunchy sound. Very simple stuff. Now we can add an EQ, and this EQ has one bell boost here, and that's the gain that's going from cutting to boosting. So we're cutting harmonics, and then we're heavily boosting harmonics. The note filter boosting the frequency of both dials. And then obviously when the key change, that moves, as we keep going on about. And then we have LFO 1 boosting the gain of only one of them. And I'm kind of using this EQ as like final flavor, like the final shaping of the sound. So everything we've done on the other page with the oscillators, we're getting like the 90% of it there. And then I like to use the EQ and then sometimes a filter before that to just manipulate the harmonics before the distortion so that we get that tone that we're looking for. And without, so it's missing a little bit in the mid-range, and I just want that mid-range to poke up on the offbeat. You get the idea. So what I will do is I'll put this patch in the description, and then you can open it up, and then you can also now follow on with the next bit where I start sort of changing things and showing how you can manipulate that sound and then get different results from this essentially starting point, if you like. So the reason why I like to work in a synth to make the basses, and I used to use samples where I'd make a sound, I'd start with a kick drum, kind of like the hard style sort of process of like kick distortion, EQ distortion, I'll get the tone, then I'd resample that, put it into a sampler like Contact or whatever, and then use that to sort of follow the melodic patterns on the drops with the basses. And there's so many variables that are going to happen when you pitch shift and put into a sampler, and I don't trust it. So I'd rather it come straight out the tin, and then I know it's exactly how I've synthesized it and processed it and programmed it, etc. But also, in an ideal world, you would make a sound, start producing your track, put that sound in, everything's perfect. Never works like that. You will come 4 hours into a track and realize that your bass just doesn't sound good anymore, or it doesn't work with how the direction of the track's gone, so you need to adjust it. And if you've got it as a sample, you're very limited on what you can do with that, and it's far easier to do it in a synth. Primarily, I would use phase plant to do my basses, and the reason for that is there's unlimited oscillators, filters, effects, EQs. Like, for example, I'd love if Serum had just another EQ, so I could use one to then push into a distortion and shape it, then one afterwards just to add a bit of top end if I needed to brighten it up. But we're kind of limited on that. So yeah, I use phase plant because there's more modules. It's a bit more advanced and a bit scarier to look at, but hopefully I'll do a video soon where I kind of make it look less scary. But who knows? There's other things we'll do first. So they're my reasons why I like to do it in a synth. So how do we change this? What sort of things do we look at to change? Well, there's quite a few things we can go down. So having this sound here, we could simply move this phase and it's going to change everything drastically. You could add more voices. You could add more detune. You could change the shape of this. And then you could also change this EQ beforehand, so the frequency of where it's boosting up or cutting. So yeah, as you can see, loads of stuff you can do and reshape it. You can add obviously filters beforehand. So yeah, that's essentially how I work on bass. It's kind of like a backwards process where you have distortion, your source sound, obviously like your oscillator, sub-os, noise, osc, and then you'll have everything that's sort of manipulating stuff, so EQs, filters, etc. before that. And like I said, I'm going to keep going on about it because it is that important. Use the note modulator to put on anything that's going to change the frequency. So if you've got an EQ that's boosting frequencies, let it follow the keys of your bass melody or your bass progression. You don't have to use the X shaper. This isn't the reason why it works. You can use any of these. That's pretty much how I do bass. And in context, it sounds like this. As a little bonus, we'll just quickly run through this. So we have a kick drum, we have a bass, we have 3 leads, they go into that bus, exactly like episode 1. We've got distortion, an EQ, different delay this time, but similar thing. I think this one has the auto ducking on, yep. And this Valhalla, I just chucked it on, put on some stereo boost on the sides, and that then goes into an OTT, Back into an uber loud, probably a little less on the tops than we did in episode 1 because it's already got a bright sort of sound, so we didn't need to push it too much. And then obviously the OTT uber loud are pushing the reverbs up, and then a sidechain. So yeah, that's the leads. And then we have some chords to back up the leads. And then we just have a little drum loop, crash, and then we have these two little fills here, all together. So yeah, hopefully that explains everything clearly, how I would make bass and like one of the processes. I mean, it's not the only process. There's a million ways you can do it. It's just currently that's the way I'm doing it, and it seems to be working for me. And I thought I'd share it with you lot. I've been Stonebank, happy bass making, and I'll see you in the next one. Big up yourselves.